I'm getting started with a epic topic today. I'll be sharing here live on YouTube, also on Facebook, and I've got a separate live stream going on the X platform. I'm going to be sharing some insights today about the value of human life. And if you're on X and you'd like to see what I'm looking at here, go to YouTube and type in Weequel Live. I'm also going to be chatting here with a close friend of mine. His name is Mboya Michael. He's been a developer with Weequel app for more than 3 years now. And he's over here on Twitter. Hey there, Mboya, how's it going?
Oh, good.
All right.
Yeah, how about you?
I'm doing great. I was just letting folks know that if they want to see some of the visuals, I'm going to have some visuals coming up here. And so if you want to see those, you can pull it up on the Weequel Live channel. This first one, just to kick things off, this is a visual of life expectancy in the United States as well as in other developed countries. We're also going to be looking at some statistics from countries that are not developed. What's interesting about this chart is that the United States, as you can see, is the only developed country with a falling life expectancy. It seemed to have plateaued out around 2010. And then when COVID hit, that obviously did a number on many countries. You can see that too in this chart. But for the most part, other countries have been rebounding from COVID, and the United States is still well below where it was at just before COVID. So another thing I was looking into was ChatGPT. ChatGPT, I was asking it to provide some measures of human life from different countries. Now, one thing to know about valuing human life is that this is something that people are forced to do. So if you're wondering, well, like, you can't put a value on human life, Joe, like that's impossible. Well, that's not practical. You have to make decisions. I'll give you a few examples. One would be if you're trying to decide what speed limit to put on a road. Well, the higher the speed limit, the more likely it is that people are going to die. At the same time, at a higher speed limit, you can reduce the amount of time that you're spending on the road. So you're looking at a trade-off between time, as like time in terms of like how much time people are spending on the road, versus also human life, that people would die in the process. Another example is payoffs from looking at life insurance, like how much is someone going to get paid, or how much do loved ones get if someone dies unexpectedly, or if they're just dying from old age, and triangulating that is often based on some multiple of how much money people make. But then there's also ways that you can get at this by looking at how much people are compensated by someone if they were to do something. Maybe it was by accident that they killed someone by accident. Like, what kind of compensation should they give somebody for the harm that they experienced from having a loved one pass away? And there are lots of considerations with these. Like, one consideration would be, well, how old was the person, right? How many potential years of life did they lose in the process? So that's by way of background. If you're new to the concept of measuring life, this is something that policymakers have to do when they make decisions about like whether or not to support payouts for people that died in floods. That's actually controlled in part by the National Flood Flood Insurance Administration. So they set prices on these things. And it varies dramatically by country. So let me go ahead and just jump into some of this. So the Environmental Protection Agency has historically used a value of a statistical life estimate of approximately 7.4 million. So that's adjusted to 2006 dollars. So it would be substantially higher today. It looks like the Department of Transportation, when they're trying to make policy decisions that involve looking at the value of a human life, looks like it was at 9.1 million in 2020 or 2012. Here are some other countries. So in Sweden, it looks like they're valuing a human life at, no, here we've got euros instead of dollars here. So let me see if I can get this right. I think that a euro is worth maybe $1.2. I need to go back and check, but it's not dramatically different from a US dollar. And then here in India, let's go ahead and look at a developing country. So in India, oh, hello?
0.06.
Sorry, what?
It's really close.
Sorry, what?
Euro to dollar is right now 1.06, so it's really close.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that. And then here we've got India, and it looks like we're looking at 0.64 million. So notice the difference here. In India, the value of a human life, and again, these are just estimates. In this particular case, we're looking at an example ChatGPT grabbed from like an average of manufacturing industries. They would have to set a value on this. If you're thinking about like factory work, any kind of work that's like more dangerous, you can see values being put on human life in the sense that if you're compensating people for dying on the job, people that are working in mines, factories tend to be more expensive or more dangerous because of all of the different manufacturing equipment, the robotics around. So if someone passes away, well, then, you need to compensate the family for that. And then you're going to be more and more strict regarding the safety protocols that you put in place in that country until you're able to, as crass as this sounds, I mean, this is a reality that these companies are going to increase their safety standards until they've reached a profit maximizing point of death on the job. That sounds atrocious. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like, oh, well, there's no way this could possibly be true. It's like, well, actually, no, it's true everywhere. It's true everywhere. If you were to try to reduce the probability of people ever dying doing anything relating to their work, then nothing would ever get done because people could like potentially trip and just fall, even if they're just walking around in an office, right? So like, shit happens basically. So you'll see in these factors, that's why in some countries, in developing countries, they will not have nearly as high of the safety standards that they do in, say, for example, the United States. Or in some of these countries, like in Sweden, you can see that the value of a human life in some of these European countries is actually higher than the United States. Like, that's actually, no, I'm not seeing that here. Let's see. I'm actually not seeing that here. Not in these examples, at least. Pounds worth more than a US dollar. This is probably like maybe 2.2 million. So the US has this really, really high relative value that they're putting on life. I would say absolute value. So now why is that? And why is it that this is, why would these states be in a situation now where they're actually falling in terms of life expectancy? And what does this mean for other countries? Could it be the case that other developed countries that have a higher life expectancy haven't had their life expectancy start to fall, but as they're valuing human life more and more, could it be the case that that is actually something that's causing human life to become shorter in the United States? What's driving that? So I have a theory on this, that I actually do think that the United States, being the place that put the highest value on life expectancy, is also one of the reasons why it's correlating to the reason why the United States is the first developed country to actually have a falling life expectancy. But before I get into my theory on this, maybe I'll pause there for Mboya. Feel free to jump in. I also invited Sentry to join because I think that there's some insights here in terms of understanding different countries and why culturally some countries can be so different that certain things that we do and say are fine in some countries, but in other countries it's like, whoa, who are you and where are you coming from? I think it relates to this life expectancy or the value of human life embedded in cultures. But anyway, Mboya, what do you think of this data? What do you think of the topic? Are you or do you just want me to jump into my theory as to why having a high value of life in the US is causing problems?
Yeah, I'd say the topic must be very controversial. One of those that it's almost a taboo for most places to even talk about trying to play value. When you've shown the data, is when people actually put the value, but it shouldn't be taken well most of the time to for people to know that there's a certain value that's been placed. But yeah, I think that a lot of decisions, whenever you're making decisions, there's always trade-offs. So that determine policy, they determine how much resources are allocated to different things and so on. So yeah, I'm really curious about this theory you have. Okay, sounds good. And feel free to ask questions. You could ask questions here on X, or I don't have Facebook up, but certainly if you're on Twitter or Facebook, I think you can write a comment there, and I'll see it. And I'll be able to address those. All right. Well, let's go ahead and dive into. I'll jump into ChatGPT to help, so that way we can have like a shared source of information here. So here's the question I'm going to ask. List out the technologies that the US got before the average developed country, how far ahead, and what those were. So research and list the major technologies that the USA had access to before the average country in the developed world. Include things like credit and insurance markets, reliable roads, hospitals, and let's say computers, internet, and contract law enforcement, and more. Let's see how far ahead the United States really was, at least compared to the developed world. Okay, so we were number one in mass production and assembly line manufacturing. Okay, it just says significant, but it was definitely decades. So what did that do? It dropped the cost of a lot of goods and services. Personal computing and the internet. So we were getting access to this stuff basically by like the late 1990s. If you had, if you were a middle income family, you probably had a computer by like the late 1990s in the United States. That certainly wasn't true in a lot of the developing or the developed world even. It's not actually providing estimates on the length of time. Advised to include an estimate of how many years the USA was ahead with these technologies from the average developed country. Okay, here we go. Come on. So mass production, 20 to 30 years. Personal computing, 5 to 10 years. Internet,
5 to 15 years. Advanced financial services, credit, insurance markets. Think of like our house burning down, and we just immediately got reimbursed for this within 48 hours. 20 to 30 years. Healthcare innovations, just being able to go to a place with a reliable doctor that could give you the kinds of medicines that would generally cure most ailments. 10 to 20 years. Space exploration, I doubt that that's a factor. AI, 5 to 10 years. Nah, I'd say that was pretty universally. Well, I guess some things, some AI. Reliable road infrastructure. It says 10 to 20, but our national highway system back in 1956, this was a huge competitive advantage that the U.S. had. We also had like basically the United States, we were interconnected in a way that made it very easy for people to travel across the United States, leave homes, leave their community, find new jobs elsewhere. Whereas the Europe, which is the place where you're going to find the vast majority of these developed countries that we compare to the US, they only just switched over to having a common currency back in 1999 and having free flow of labor basically over the past 20 years. But that's been a challenge for them to be able to integrate these countries. So the European Union trying to come up and implement some of what we have in the US, but they're like 100 years behind in terms of that. Contract law enforcement, intellectual property protections, time ahead, 20 to 30 years. I mean, that's huge. You guys know this. That's why crypto is so big in across Africa in particular, is because of the lack of contract law, intellectual property protections. Absolutely huge. Consumer electronics, 5 to 10 years. Okay, so those are the big ones. All right. So we were way ahead, basically, is what that means. We were way ahead. And by being way ahead, we were able to create a lot of security. This general view amongst people in the United States that, you know, life is supposed to be good, that we're supposed to have dreams, that, you know, when we get married, it's supposed to be to Prince Charming or the damsel in distress that the knight rescues. We're supposed to think that if we get like a college degree that we'll be able to get a job that will pay the bills. Like there's just this general optimism that frankly can just be rather annoying to Europeans. And I would think to like people in the developing world would sometimes come across as just like arrogant and naive would be my guess. What do you think, Mboya?
Okay, the funny thing is, for someone who mentioned being several years ahead, the way I see it in Kenya, missing, I think we haven't reached that point yet in some of the things. So yeah, that's a good point about it. Yeah, some of the issues are completely unrelatable to those of us in the third world. So yeah, I think the saying first world problem comes into play. Because for most of us in the third world, that just the kind of life that's let's say in the US would be the kind of life we dream of. So seeing all these others becomes quite hard to relate to.
It's very strange. Like you've got these folks from the developing world, especially trying to get into the United States. Why are they doing it? Like one of the big reasons why is the schools. And yet the United States is the only country that has a rising amount of violence against schools being conducted by students. Like there are other countries where this kind of thing happens occasionally, but we're the only country where it's growing exponentially. And it didn't even start at like a super low base. Like it's something that's so tragic. You would think that something like that would just be, you know, I mean, it's horrific to even think about. It was just something that didn't even happen. Like if you look at the history of things that have happened, like horrible things that have happened throughout history, there's a lot of horrible things, but the idea of like kids deciding to shoot up or attack fellow students in their school, I'm not talking about bullies punching somebody. I'm talking about like with the intent of trying to kill everyone in a school. Like this is not something that teenagers did in the past. So it's very strange that like all these things that would seemingly be so great that you'd see people being so incredibly depressed. Yet that's exactly what you have happening. Like the teenage suicide rate in the US is like 5 times higher than that of India. Why is that? You know, if life is better, that's the real question here, I think. And I think that the answer, in part, comes from looking at the nature of what people in the United States worry about. So let's go ahead and look at like what's driving this. So what are the leading causes of death in the USA compared to the average of the rest of the world? All right. So, leading cause of death in the US and globally share similarities, particularly concerning non-communicable diseases. However, notable differences exist. So, in the US, what do we got? We got heart disease, cancer, unintentional injuries, COVID, stroke, Alzheimer's, chronic respiratory disease, diabetes, okay, liver disease. All right, now the rest of the world, what do they got? We got compared. Okay, I'm just going to go to the comparative analysis. So both US and the globe, heart disease and stroke are leading causes of death. Respiratory, chronic lower respiratory disease rank higher in the US compared to globally. Infectious disease. Globally, infectious diseases such as lower respiratory infections remain significant causes of death, especially in low-income countries. So like the US doesn't die as much from disease. Like that's a big one where disease just used to be so much more of a problem, but it's not as much in the developed world. External neurological disorders. Okay, so that's a big one. So, and this is including people that are older as well. And ChatGPT has a way of also trying to like play nice and not say things that are too disturbing. But some of the obvious things that it's missing would be the number of people in the United States that are older that are essentially committing suicide in a way that is passive. It's like a passive form of committing suicide. So we're talking about people that are abusing alcohol, people that are abusing painkillers. That's a huge one in the United States. Just this rampant amount of very dangerous painkillers that are basically like opioids. Another one will be obesity. That, again, this is another topic that you're not really supposed to talk about, but it's a huge one, literally huge. The United States has far more obese people. We're eating ourselves to death. So I could try to confirm some of this stuff, but like, let's go ahead and, because I don't want to leave the check and balance here because I'm kind of doing a lot of this on the fly on my own, but be more specific in talking about differences. For example, lifestyle choice differences. It's pretty well known that in Europe, for example, there's just a lot more care that's put in the type of foods that people eat. So cardiovascular disease, heart disease, stroke, like the United States eat a lot of things that are just not very good for them. And they're choosing to do that. Lower life expectancy, we have higher rates of cancer. Part of that is also just exposure to things that aren't particularly natural. We're also spending a lot more time living in here's the big one, like diabetes. Over 40%. Over 40% of US adults are obese. Wow. Okay, I'll have to fact check that one. Fact check the obesity statistics and statistics. I mean, 40%. Wow. Yeah, okay. 40% of US adults are classified as obese. Okay, and then globally, obesity rates have more than tripled since 1975. So anyway, I think that's pretty obvious to people. I mean, people don't talk about it, but it's true. So why am I getting at all this? I mean, I think that one of the big reasons why this is so important is it relates to a thesis that Sume wrote about in one of her projects. That when you're confronted by challenges that are very obvious, that are threatening to one's physical health, like disease, like starvation, like, you know, having food and shelter, clothing, these kinds of things that are very obvious. These have been challenges that human beings have been facing forever. And our psyche developed to confront these kinds of challenges. Now, what happens when you take these challenges away? What happens when life becomes so easy that you have a difficult time being confronted in a way where you're ever like physically in danger, or that your life is so stable that you're able to plan your life ahead, such that if you have a child, like in the United States, you might start planning for college and saving for college even when they're like an infant, because you're just that confident. You're just that confident that you're going to be able to hold your job, that if you have a house fire, you'll get reimbursed by your insurance company, that if you need to take out a loan, you can go to a credit market, you can refinance your house, like whatever you need to do. And then if you died, you've got life insurance, so your kids can still be able to, achieve whatever it is that you're planning out in advance. The United States is a very strange country. Before you go on a walk, on a hike in the woods, there will be a sign that will tell you all of the rules of the path that you're going to be on. Be sure to bring a cell phone just in case you get lost. We're talking about this will be like a half-mile long trail or something, right in the middle of a big city. It'll tell you things like, don't bring a gun, don't litter, don't walk off the path, like all these rules, right? Same thing if you go to a pool in the US, just all these rules. Basically just sit there and wade in the water. You can swim if you're not close to somebody, just like all these rules. Don't eat the paint. We have warning signs on our paint cans in the United States that tell people that presumably know how to read. So I'm not talking about babies. I'm talking about adults that can read. To not eat the paint. Like that is how much we value life in the United States. Yet increasingly, a lot of Americans don't value their own lives very much and are either taking them directly or are slowly taking them away by essentially wasting away. And that, I think, is the fundamental problem that humanity is facing increasingly so, and it's starting in the developed world. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to have some friends on that are not in the developed world, because it can look like it's just this dream, but it comes at this risk, at a risk of losing sight of what's meaningful and thinking that having a bigger house or a nicer car, better looking clothes, or a prettier girlfriend or boyfriend, or having more followers on Instagram is somehow a meaningful pursuit and a meaningful way to measure the value of one's life. I don't think that human beings are naturally equipped to do a very good job of knowing how much the environment that they're in ends up having an absolutely enormous impact on the nature of how we think about what has value. Like if you're in one of these developing countries, one of the things that you'll see quite a bit is that they spend a lot more time with family and friends. But the reason why is not so obvious. Like you would think, it's because they value their friends and family more. than Americans do, who move away from friends and family, and they'll put their grandparents in nursing homes and, essentially do all these things that people in the developing world would look at and go, oh my goodness sakes, I can't imagine putting grandma or grandpa in a nursing home. Well, part of the reason why you don't do that is because there isn't the infrastructure, there isn't the option, and people don't have as much money. Like, it's very expensive to take grandma or grandpa to the nursing home. Like in the US, it costs like around the same amount that it costs for like the average annual salary. Like $70,000 to have your grandparent in a nursing home is very expensive. But there's also all these reasons why people think that that's what you're supposed to do. One is the care that people provide. There's all these specialized sources of care. So the United States was also one of the first country leading the pack for the most part, that started taking what used to be something supplied by our relationships, our friends and our family, and started to be supplied by professionals, professional therapists, professional accountants, professional lawyers, frankly, like for a lot of this stuff, it's almost like professional friends. It's like people that you're supposed to talk to about all these various aspects of your life, even teachers. Parents take on a lot more of the role of teacher in developing parts of the world where they still haven't built up the infrastructure to provide, at least on the surface of it, reasonably good looking schools, well-staffed schools. And so in the United States, we're going through this period where we've been experimenting with outsourcing a lot of what we used to get from family and friends and neighbors in our community, and people in our churches or synagogues and mosques, and outsourcing these to professionals. And that's made GDP go up. If you're making a home cooked meal for yourself, then that doesn't show up in GDP beyond just the cost of the food that you bought at the grocery store. But if you go buy it from a restaurant, then GDP goes up. That's another reason why the US is considered more quote unquote developed, is that we do a lot more eating out. So we're outsourcing the food that we make too. Well, that has an impact. That has an impact on life expectancy. That also has an impact on how much you enjoy life, because what ultimately really matters the most. If you look through the literature of different wise people across different religions and different centuries and millennia, you'll see that everybody really wants the same things. You only need so much security, food, shelter, clothing, and then beyond that, it's all relationships. But in the moment, relationships are hard, as I'm sure Century can attest to. It's tough. When you're trying to work with somebody, when you're trying to create value with someone, when you're trying to survive, it's difficult to maintain relationships. And the reason why it's difficult is in part because people never had to actually try to keep relationships, because we were born, lived, and died within the same 20-mile radius as our fathers and our fathers' fathers and our fathers' fathers' fathers. Going back centuries and millennia, that's how we evolved. If we were banished from our tribe or our community, then that was almost certainly a death sentence. The only time that people ever met new people was when that new person was someone that they met in the jungle, or was like a raiding party out to try to destroy your tribe, or somebody that you knew that was close to you had a baby. That was it. Those were the only times that you met someone new. So you worked, you lived, died, took a crap every day in front of the same 50 to 100 people. Everybody knew you. If you were good at fishing, everybody knew. If you were really bad at hunting, gathering, and like accidentally brought back the wrong mushroom that nearly killed your grandmother or something, like everybody knew. It was small town living, big time. And people gossiped about each other. And, if you were somebody that screwed up, well, then people knew, and you couldn't run away. You certainly couldn't do what you're doing today, which is basically deciding that you're going to believe whatever you want about who you are, your identity on the outside seems to mean a lot more than identity on the inside. Like what you're capable of doing to help people seems to matter less and less than what you look like. Um, these are, when push comes to shove, and this is where maybe, and boy, I'll bring you back in here to get your thoughts on this. But when push came to shove, relationships held because we had to hold on to relationships. We didn't have credit markets. We didn't have insurance markets. We didn't have, armies and police forces and security that would prevent us from needing to protect ourselves and rely on friends and family and people nearby to have our backs if we got into trouble. We didn't have any of these things. There were no handouts. There was no Red Cross. It was a lot like the developing world is today. And that's one reason why they don't value life as much, because people die. People die from really sad things that are preventable all the time. So I think a lot of Americans have just gotten a bit, they just don't know how good they got it, I think. But what do you think, Mboya? Oh, you requested to join, sorry. There, I tried to add you back. I'll invite Sentry and Abhinav if they want to speak too.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there we go. Hit me.
Yeah, I think in a large part you're right. That sense of valuing the relationships comes from the fact that you need them to survive. So it's not, I think, from what I've seen, the US can feel a little bit, you can easily feel a bit isolated because the professionals you're interacting with are probably, you only have the interactions from that professional aspect. It's not really the relationship that you can really call them friends per se. For the developing world, we really, really need the family and friends, because if something goes wrong, we have this, we come as a collective to help whoever is in trouble. Even when someone wrongs you, you wrong them, there's that incentive to make sure you repair that relationship. It fosters that sense of belonging. Because, you really need that to survive. I've also seen in a lot of the developing countries, the very urban areas are starting to head towards the same route as the US, but several semi-urban and rural areas still maintain that sense of relationship. There's that culture that's there that just comes from the needing to survive. So, for example, the example that you gave of sending parents to care homes, that would be very frowned upon if it was an option. So first, many people don't even think of it as an option. We already have it instilled to us in such a way that your parents take care of you when you're young, as you're learning the ropes to do your part. Then as you grow older and you're earning, you start preparing to also take care of them. So they're always around. Your kids are also quite expected to do the same to you. And that happens.
Yep, no, I'm with you 100%.
Also, when it comes to wasting away your life, like, for example, the suicide rates in the United States, I think it is a lot harder in, say, a place like Kenya, just because it's, okay, other than the sense of connection, it's very apparent to you how selfish it is. You know, a lot of people are counting on you, so you decided to take your own life. That would be very selfish, very not caring, and that applies through and through, I think, in a sense. So that also helped keep the suicide rates very, very low.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there 100%. I was also trying to look up a statistic about US versus the rest of the world. The first houses. Yeah, well, that's if you feel like your life is not so important to somebody else, that it wouldn't make much of a difference. I mean, of course, that's gonna be a huge deal. I think that this is also why, like, one reason why, like, men seem to be even more so on the losing side of this trend. Like the value of being larger, physically more powerful as like a protector seems less important in an environment where you have a very, at least, I mean, I consider the police department to be quite trustworthy. We've had some issues in the past. Like, well, you know, I was attacked outside of a grocery store. And I never had any trouble getting a hold of the police department. But if you have that, then you don't necessarily need a man protector as much as you would in countries where, you know, the police is a group that, like, you're often needing to just pay off in order to get something that you might want. Or they exist there more to protect, like, the landlords and the people that have more resources, often, again, because of, like, bribing. Like, you can't bribe police officers generally in the United States. Like, I don't know anybody that's ever tried to do that. If they did, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they just got hauled straight off to jail. And that's a great thing. It's great to be in a country where the police department generally isn't getting bribed, right? That's awesome. But then it also kind of leaves people where men traditionally thinking of themselves as being protectors. Well, you don't necessarily need to be a protector if you're married to somebody that makes money and you're living in a place that has a good police department. So then you have to, like, think about your life. Well, now what do I do? Right? Who am I and what am I supposed to be? What does that mean for marriage? Like, if women don't necessarily need a man as breadwinner or as protector, then men for the first time in history are needing to think a lot more about how do they add value, you know, beyond that. I think that's one reason why you'll see, like, at least in movies, and sometimes I'll watch some of these, like, you know, romantic comedies with my wife. She's more into romantic comedies. I'm more of like a John Wick guy, and I just want to see somebody kick somebody else's butt nonstop for like 2 hours. But, you know, sometimes I'll watch the romantic comedy, and you'll see this a lot. You generally see in these romantic comedies that, like, women are wanting so much more from their man than just him being a breadwinner and that he's, you know, a protector type. That was enough for like the first million years of human evolution. Not anymore. You know. And it was something that I noticed too when I first started dating my wife. There were a bunch of other people that were interested in her, and like these graduate students, and all of the other suitors that she was looking at were all Chinese guys. Not surprising, my wife's from China. And these guys were giving her lots of gifts. They were giving her lots of gifts. It's thing like, well, why were they giving her all these gifts? Well, because they wanted to show her that they could take care of her. That was pretty standard. That was like, if you want to get the best girls in the developing world, that was still the mentality. Then you show her that you have resources, right? And now that almost sounds so foreign to people in the U.S. now that they don't realize that's still the way that a lot of the rest of the world operates, right? It's kind of interesting, but it's true. Like, I mean, maybe I'm curious from your standpoint, and boy, was there some element of that in your most recent in your relationship now, or is that like totally not relevant at all?
It's not so much in but I still do observe quite a bit of it, say with friends and the general population, so to say. There's a large part of, if you want to date someone, you need to prove them that you can take care of them. Finances are a big part of it. For those living in the more dangerous areas, there's also a bit of you need to be a buff guy, muscular. Yeah, so part of it does play a role.
Yeah, well, I'm glad there's other things besides that. I'm not particularly buff. But I mean, certainly like I'd say that my wife and daughters look to me in part because of me being a protect. Like we had somebody break into the house once. And then when we had the house fire, like I was very much just immediately in, disaster preparedness mode, and just like get everybody out of the house. I was the last one out of the house, didn't even think twice. I'd say that's pretty typical male behavior, but that's one of those things that I think is changing. You're also seeing that I think the US was one of the first developing countries where women started getting into college and also graduating at a higher rate and making more money upon graduation compared to men, in part because I think for women, like there was no natural tendency to think, oh, well, I'm going to be able to build a career off of my physical strength, right? They're kind of going into this knowing that they're going to need to use their brains, right? Whereas guys, not necessarily. Like just a lot of the jobs that guys had didn't necessarily involve using their brains as much. Anyway, I think that one of the last points I want to make about the value of human life and kind of the impact that this has broadly is that if you're talking to people that are from a country that has a much lower value that they're putting on human life, that it becomes very easy to talk past each other and to not understand each other. Like one of the other charts I could pull up would be just like the falling number of people that are dying in like the first year of their life, or that suffered some kind of a tragedy when they were younger, or even just violent crime rates in the United States. Like I could try to find that, but violent crime rates in the United States have just been going down, 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 down. Violent crime USA chart. Yeah, here we go. This is one of these things that people generally don't think about, but it's true. The United States has just generally had a falling violent crime rate. Here, I can open this up in a separate tab. Here we go. FT. Sorry, 1 second. Here we go. Like, look at this. We've had falling crime rates. So it's not that we're having falling life expectancy because people are getting angrier and people are doing things that are more hostile. Generally speaking, that's not been the case. It's because people are really losing their way. They don't really know what to do. We've seen that a lot with students too. People that are coming out of public school, they just don't know why they're learning what they're learning. I think that problem's even worse now because it's so easy to see that robots like ChatGPT can answer everything that they're doing. So it makes what they're doing even less appealing in terms of seeing the value in it. And then for marriages are struggling because people don't necessarily know why they're married. People don't even necessarily know why they're having kids anymore. Like that's something that my daughters will occasionally ask or suggest to kids that they ask their parents, like, why did you make us? You know, and very well-meaning parents will say things like, oh, because you're adorable, or, oh, I wish you'd never grow up. Like, almost treating them almost like they're pets or something, which is something I talked to Jimmy about earlier. Like, this is not good. Like, kids that grow up think like being treated like they're pets and they don't have responsibilities, they don't have any real meaning or purpose, they're not overcoming real challenges, they're going to struggle mentally. Abhinav Madki is on the phone, or he's on Twitter. He was sharing some comments earlier. You know, he's 16 years old. He's the primary breadwinner for his family of 5. He has a lot of responsibilities on his shoulders. And is he stressed out at times? Yeah. Does he consider committing suicide? No. Does he take painkillers and drink himself to sleep at night to get through the pain? No. He has too many responsibilities. So, you know, that just isn't a problem that he's allowed himself to have, as to, you know, wondering whether or not he has some kind of neurodivergent problem, or maybe he's suffering from depression. Maybe he's suffering from anxiety because life is hard and he's a 16-year-old taking care of his family, you know, but he just doesn't think that way because he grew up where life is harder and real problems are rather evident to people, as opposed to deciding whether or not your 10-year-old has the right to change their pronouns, like made up problems. We need to learn how to make meaningful things come out of our lives without resorting to essentially tribal politics and just getting angry at the TV. That's another thing that the US got before other countries, is we got the ability to see and obsess over global problems that we can't do anything about. I can't remember the last time that Abhinav brought up being worried about the US election or some of the thing like global warming or what, any number of things that were outside of the immediate things that he just needed help with for his family. That's what he tends to care about. And I think that's something that we are also helping to do at Wequel, just like helping students to come up with project ideas, things that they can do in their lives, for themselves, for their family, for their friends, in their community. Helping them come up with meaningful things to do, I think, is a big part of what we're trying to do to address this problem. But it's a challenging one. I think I'll wrap up here soon. And boy, did you have any other thoughts or questions on this? You, Abhinav, I noticed that you had shared a couple comments here that I shared with viewers, but feel free to chime in here. Otherwise, I'll probably close things out here soon. Go for it, Mboya. I can see you took the mute off, but I still can't hear you. I don't know why. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and close it. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties on Twitter Space, but this is great. I'm really glad I got a chance to talk about this issue. I think it's really important.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Oh, here, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think Twitter crashed out. I'm just teaching, nothing much to add. It's been an insightful topic because I've never thought of the value of life from this perspective per se.
Well, you think about what happened to Abhinav, where he almost lost his house, right? Or even think about some of the challenges that we've had working with people in some countries that were, you know, really struggling, and how the ability to build trust with people that live in a country that doesn't value life very high, that's the thing that was the most interesting and important for me to realize. It helped explain why some of what we were doing at Wequel, which is very aspirational, like we probably put a higher value on life than like any other organization I can think of. Part of that is just being in education, but also lifting young people up, empowering them to have a lot of freedom. Like we're putting more value on these kids' lives by nature of us giving them so much more freedom, right? We value their ideas, which you can't really say is true about any Common Core curriculum across the world because it's common across all students. So you're not valuing the human life in terms of any of its individuality. We certainly are. And commodities aren't generally very valuable. If you treat all the children the same, then you're basically saying that they're interchangeable. So when we come across people that are interested in working with us, I think that sometimes they're going to get confused if they're not people that value human life at a very high level. They just won't understand. They'll do things like, for example, they won't value their own opinion very high. They'll think that the way that you're supposed to get brownie points, like with me, is if they call me boss or they call me sir, or they like do whatever I say without challenging me or sharing their own ideas or even sharing their own emotions. Like that's another thing I noticed is kind of strange about people in the developing world is that they're less likely to open up and share kind of like emotional struggles, challenges, in part because like the world around them hasn't been encouraging them to do that. Like you'll experience that as a child in the United States pretty regularly, where if a child is crying, then the parent will stop whatever they're doing and they'll like be attentive, be like, oh no, your feelings are hurt. What's the matter? Let's talk about it, right? But if you're growing up in a tough environment, in a country where generally like there's just a lot of atrocities that have happened and you're acting like you're emotionally very vulnerable and emotionally distraught, and even more so if you're a guy, if you're a boy, you're probably told to just wipe the tears off and suck it up, deal with it.
Man up.
Man up. Yeah. And you know, there's something to that. There's something to that. But we need to find a way to help people learn how to man up or grow up in a way where they're choosing to do that because they see the value in becoming a wise, powerful individual that can help make the world better, as opposed to being forced to do that because of circumstances that are so challenging. We can't rely on the latter in the United States anymore. We need people to choose to grow up, to want to seek wisdom, to want to try things that are hard and risk failure. Because the obvious reasons for living are thankfully being innovated away. So anyway, it's just something to keep in mind when we reach out to the rest of the world and we're bringing people on board from different ways of life. It is harder, I think, to find people in the developing world that have that so much love for life and respect for life the way that you do, Mboya. We need to show people that life is valuable regardless of where you're from. It doesn't really matter if insurance or credit markets are better in the United States. That doesn't mean that we should be treating certain lives as less valuable. And if you want to be successful in this new personalized digital interconnected economy, so much of that success relies on seeing the good in other people, seeing the promise in other people, seeing the value in other people. So we need to teach that. Anyway, Thank you for joining me. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. This is great. Sume made me a new studio where I can do my own storytelling if I want to. So I enjoy it.
Nice.
Yeah, that's cool. Feel free
Thanks so much.
Yeah, feel free to take a look at the YouTube live stream. I shared some of these visuals there. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.